Now, the first step of our method is to identify the automation boundaries, according to the principle that not all process tasks can be automated. In fact, there are certain business processes that are inherently manual. For example, a post-production process is a process that, while it is supported by software tools such as a video editing suite, it is still mainly a manual business process that requires a lot of creative input from the various people involved in post-production, like the sound editor, the video editor, and so on. Another example is the order-to-cash process at a restaurant that we saw in the introduction. This process is mainly made up of a number of manual activities, like greeting and seating the customer, providing the menu, getting the order, serving drinks, meals, and so on. So even if, again, this business process is supported by some software system, typically that would be a restaurant management system, it will still be mainly made up of activities that are manual, where it would be very hard for a BPMS to coordinate handover of work between the various resources involved in various activities, like between the customer, for example, and the waiter, or between the waiter and the cook, or the hall manager. To identify if the whole process cannot be automated, at least what are the parts of this process that we can support effectively by means of a BPMN system, is by first identifying the type of each task. In fact, we consider automated tasks, user tasks, and manual tasks. So we can start this by identifying each task type. So the first type is an automated task. An automated task, as we said, is a task whose execution is delegated to a software system. This could be an external system, meaning external to the BPMS, like an ERP system that automatically checks stock availability, or it could be an automated task that is internally performed by the BPMS itself. Typically, this is when simple calculations are involved, like, for example, automatically selecting the best quote out of a number of quotes. So this is typically a function that can be automatically performed by encoding this function within the BPMS. Now, the second type of task is user tasks. So these are tasks that require user inputs, and typically this input is provided by means of a work list handler, which is a component of the BPM system. And input is provided typically on top of electronic forms. The last type of tasks is actually the manual tasks. So these are those tasks that would be typically hard to automate. For example, manually picking up products from the warehouse, or manually loading a truck for shipment, or even shipping the actual product. That is something that is done through a truck. So in BPMN, we can annotate each task by means of a markers on the top left corner of the task box. And this marker identifies the type of task: automated, user, or manual. There are actually 4 different subtypes for an automated task. The first one is the so-called service task, represented with a double wheel on the top left corner. So the service task is an automated task whose execution is entirely delegated to an external software system, like the ERP system in our example. Check raw materials availability is a very common example of a service task. The second one is the automated task that is actually performed internally to the BPMS. This is called the script task, represented with a script marker on the top left corner of the task box. For example, selecting the best quote out of a number of quotes that we receive from different suppliers is a simple function that can be implemented with some scripting code, such as JavaScript or Perl, within the BPMS itself, depending on the language that the system itself supports. Then we have the send task, represented with a black envelope. The send task is a task that is simply used to send notifications out to external software systems or applications, for example, to notify a claim approval. A typical way of notifying external applications would be by means of an email. So in this case, we would automatically notify the email account of the customer with the result of their claim assessment. The counterpart is the receive task, represented as the white envelope. It is the counterpart because it's about receiving an electronic message, again it could be in the form of an email, that is received by the BPMS. For example, receiving a property assessment from a property management system at a real estate surveyor. When it comes to user tasks, we annotate this by means of a little user icon, again on the top left corner of the task box. For example, approve invoice is a typical case of a user task where the invoice itself is shown to the user, like a senior financial officer, by means of an electronic document. And finally, the manual task is represented by a little white hand on the top left corner of the task box. An example, as we said, is retrieved product from warehouse.